Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Driftwood Ranch. I'm Randy Ray, the literate Texan, and I saw a video last night from Criminality about choosing a book that he had both read and loved that was published for every year that he'd been alive. And Criminality and I are about the same age. I'm 53, and I'd seen this done somewhere else before, but I don't remember where. It was one of the big mega YouTubers, I think it was, or booktubers with like 500,000 subscribers or something like that. And I thought about making a corresponding video for myself then. Goodreads makes it really easy to sort what you've read. So, you just filter by books that I've actually read, and then you put them in order of publication date. So I was born in 1970, and you know what? I don't know, maybe I haven't really looked through this before. I don't know if I've read a book that was published in every year of my life yet or not, but I'm gonna look through them while I talk to you on camera. And I'm not as skilled with the technical stuff as Criminality is, or Michael K. Vaughn, or any of those guys. So I'm just gonna look at it while I'm talking to you, but I'm not gonna have it on screen for you to see or anything like that, because I don't really know how to do that. So anyway, in 1970, there are 4 books that were published in 1970 that I've read. One was QB8 by Leon Uris, Nine Princes in Amber by Roger Lazazny, Hour of the Horde by Gordon R. Dixon, and Time and Again by Jack Finney. I really liked Hour of the Horde. I would think that would almost be my favorite book, but I love time travel novels, and Time and Again by Jack Finney is one of the classics of time travel. It's a little slow. It requires a little bit of patience. But if you're interested in, that's not super early time travel fiction, but it's earlier than a lot. It was 53 years ago. So anyway, Time and Again by Jack Finney, I can recommend. And that's 1 year, 1970. In 1971, looks like I read 4 books that were published that year too. One of them I read just this year. Black Sun by Edward Abbey, Hell House by Richard Matheson, The Ghouls, and Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas. Of those, the only one that I really like, this is an easy one, Black Sun by Edward Abbey is my favorite of those. It's a really, really short novel. It's really sad. It tells a story about a park ranger, or I guess he's not really a park ranger. He's a fire lookout. He is a park ranger for part of it too. It's semi-autobiographical. He falls in love with a younger woman. She winds up lost. He loses her. She winds up lost in the wilderness, never to return. And it's really good. A lot of the story is also told in slightly different form in a later book from Edward Abbey called The Fool's Progress, which is one of my 5 or 6 favorite novels. I know a lot of people really love Hell House by Richard Matheson. They really think Richard Matheson's a great author. I thought Hell House was terrible. I'm not that crazy about The Haunting of Hill House, upon which it's based. But Hell House, no good. The Ghouls is a collection of horror stories. If you've been watching for a while, you probably saw my review of it. It's a mixed bag. It's an anthology. I don't care for Hunter S. Thompson, Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas. Didn't really do anything for me. I did date a woman who interviewed Hunter S. Thompson for her journalism class, though. So, 1971, definitely read some books from then. 1972, I've only read 3 books that were published in 1972. The Guns of Avalon by Roger Zelazny, First Blood by David Morrell, or Morrell, I don't know how you pronounce it, and Watership Down by Richard Adams. And I liked all 3 of them, but there's no doubt that Watership Down is my favorite of the 3. Although First Blood probably close second. First Blood's a really interesting novel. I don't think the movie did it justice. So that's 3 years, 3 books, 1973, The Man Who Folded Himself by David Gerrold. Horrible book. I gave it 1 star. The Chronicles of Solar Ponds by August Derleth. Solar Ponds is August Derleth's answer to Sherlock Holmes. I guess August Derleth had gone to Arthur Conan Doyle to ask permission to continue the Sherlock Holmes novels. Conan Doyle told him no, so August Derleth created a series of short stories that were pastiches of Sherlock Holmes about a character named Solar Ponds. And Solar Ponds has his sidekick too, Dr. Parker instead of Dr. Watson. And anyway, they're terrific little short stories. They really do a nice job of capturing the feel of Sherlock Holmes stories. And Derleth eventually published more stories about Solar Ponds than Doyle published about Sherlock Holmes. Also, 1973, Burnt Offerings by Robert Marasco. A Wind in the Door, which is, I guess, a sequel to Madeleine L'Engle's first book. I can't remember the name of it. It's not A Swiftly Tilting Planet because that came later. A Wrinkle in Time. A Wind in the Door is a sequel to A Wrinkle in Time. And then The Dark is Rising by Susan Cooper is also from 1973. Crash is from 1973. Breakfast of Champions by Kurt Vonnegut Jr. is from 73. So I've read quite a few books from 1973. Hated the Man Who Folded Himself. Burnt Offerings was okay. It was a big inspiration for the Haunted Hotel novel from Stephen King, The Shining. But if I had to pick a favorite from those, I'd probably go with The Dark is Rising by Susan Cooper. A great little young adult fantasy novel. Failing that, A Wind in the Door might be second place. I didn't like Crash either. Crash and The Man Who Folded Himself are both 1 stars for me. All right, so that's 4 years in a row. I think I might nail this. 1974. Eventually, I'm going to get to a point where there's so many books in each year that I can't list them all. But there was Turtle Island by Gary Snyder. It's a collection of poetry. It's good. Wampeter's Foma and Grand Falloon by Kurt Vonnegut Jr. That is a collection of essays, which is good. Carrie by Stephen King. Not my favorite Stephen King novel. A lot of people really like Carrie. I thought the movie was really impressive. It was really scary, but the book really doesn't do much for me. Bread, which is an Ed McBain novel. It's number 29 in the 87th Precinct series, and it's terrific. All of the Ed McBain 87th Precinct novels are great. Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance by Robert M. Pirsig. The Forever War by Joe Haldeman. The Shootist is in 1975. I'm getting ahead of myself. What's my favorite from this year, 1974? Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance would be my favorite from 1974, although The Forever War would be a close second. 1975, here's a big list. The Shootist by Glennon Swarthout. I didn't realize that The Shootist was based on a novel, but it is. Great movie, John Wayne. The Greatest Miracle in the World by Og Mandino. Surprisingly good for that kind of self-help stuff. The Monkey Wrench Gang by Edward Abbey, which I did not like. It's one of the novels that he's more famous for. And I do like Edward Abbey. I just didn't think it was a very good novel. Over on the Dry Side by Louis L'Amour was from 1975. I just finished it last month. Didn't much care for it. Salem's Lot by Stephen King is from 1975. Salem's Lot is right there towards the top of the Stephen King movies that I like. It's so good. It's also one of the first one of his that I read. So, that one's an easy one. Slapstick's 1976. I'm going to get to that. Salem's Lot was my favorite book of 75. That was published in 75. 76 is a simple one. You've got Slapstick by Kurt Vonnegut Jr., Woman on the Edge of Time by Marge Piercy, which is terrific, by the way. If you like time travel stuff and feminist literature, it's a really good one. The Acts of King Arthur and His Noble Knights by John Steinbeck. That's easily my favorite from 1976. It's a shame he didn't get to finish it. He only covered half of it. So that's 7 years now. 1977, Callahan's Cross Time Saloon by Spider Robinson. That's a fun collection of short stories. The Shining by Stephen King. The Price of the Phoenix, which I just read. A Spell for Chameleon by Piers Anthony. That's it for 77. Of those, The Shining would be my favorite, although I really love Callahan's Cross Time Saloon. 1978. Okay, this is a year where there's Another Fine Myth by Robert Lynn Asprin. It's hard to believe that came out in 1978. It was way ahead of its time. It's really good. The Stand by Stephen King. Strange Eons by Robert Bloch. The House Next Door by Anne Rivers Siddons. If you want to read a really, really good haunted house book, The House Next Door is the one to go with. Possum Living, How to Live Well Without a Job and with Almost No Money by Dolly Freed. That's a really interesting one. Night Shift, collection of stories from Stephen King. That's good too. Well, this one's easy. The House Next Door is my favorite from 1978. That's 9 years in a row right there. 1979, Ghost Story by Peter Straub, The Long Walk by Richard Bachman, Castle Rugna by Piers Anthony, The Source of Magic by Piers Anthony. He was prolific, Piers Anthony. I guess he still is prolific, even though he's really gotten old. I guess that happens too. The Fate of the Phoenix, The Dead Zone. The Dead Zone by Stephen King, that's the first Stephen King novel I ever read. I still remember it. I bought it for a quarter at a garage sale. I was kind of snobbish. I didn't think I would like The Dead Zone. As it turns out, I loved it. And that turned me on to Stephen King ever since. You know, his stuff's a mixed bag. He writes just as many awful books as he does terrific books. Very few of his books kind of land in the middle for me. They're either really good or really bad. Halloween by Richard Curtis, the novelization. Curtis Richards. Believe that's a pen name for another author, but I'm not 100% sure. I think it was Dennis Etchison that wrote that. Dennis Etchison was a nice guy. I corresponded with him a little bit before he died. Thieves' World by Robert Lynn Ashburn. Shared Worlds collection of short stories from a variety of authors. Absolutely terrific. I think there were 12 books in the original series. Really, really good stuff. And then, of course, The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy by Douglas Adams came out in 1979, too. Of those, well, that one's easy, too. The Dead Zone's my favorite. Thieves' World being a close second place. Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, also a close second place. 1980. I'm embarrassed to admit that I've read so many of these Piers Anthony novels, but I did like the Apprentice Adept series. Splint Infinity was the first of those. Jacob Have I Loved by Catherine Patterson. The Stranger Beside Me by Ann Rule. It's about Ted Bundy. True crime. I don't read a lot of true crime, but I'll tell you a story about why I read that one. Firestarter by Stephen King. The Restaurant at the End of the Universe came out in 1980. Okay, so those... my favorite's probably going to be The Restaurant at the End of the Universe by Douglas Adams. Anybody watching my channel knows who Douglas Adams is and knows about the Hitchhiker's Guidebooks, I'm sure. But The Stranger Beside Me, Ted Bundy, The Shocking Inside Story by Ann Rule is really interesting to me. I worked for a company called Hotels.com for 10 years. And when we got big enough, we hired someone to be in charge of security. And the guy we hired to be in charge of security was a former Secret Service agent for George Bush. Really, really cool guy. And we all had to get badges that we used to get in and out of the office. And when someone got fired or if someone forgot their badge or something like that, they were supposed to check in at the receptionist desk and get a temporary badge so they could get in and out. And I questioned him on that. I was manager of a department, and I felt like if somebody's walking in with me, they're walking in with me, and I know who they are, so why not let them in, you know? But we had this conversation about how Ann Rule was writing a book about the Ted Bundy murders, not knowing that Ted Bundy was the murderer. At the same time, she was working a suicide hotline during the grave shift next to a young man that she became friends with. And it was strictly platonic, but they'd go out for breakfast after work and they became friends. Turned out he was Ted Bundy. And, you know, if you really want to underline the fact that you don't really know somebody until you know somebody, The Stranger Beside Me is a really, really good book to read. So, 1981. So far, I haven't missed a year yet, have I? 1981, Chronicle of a Death Foretold by Gabriel Garcia Marquez. Wonderful book. The Dark Side of the Screen, film noir by Foster Hirsch. Blue Adept by Anthony Piers Anthony. Cujo by Stephen King. I remember liking it when I read it as a teenager. Palm Sunday by Kurt Vonnegut Jr. It's another collection of essays. The Hotel New Hampshire, which I read recently. They Thirst by Robert R. McCammon. Halloween 2, the novelization, 1981. Dance Macabre by Stephen King. Red Dragon by Thomas Harris. Centaur Isle by Piers Anthony. Okay, so The Hotel New Hampshire is one of 2 books that I've read this year that I actually gave 5 stars to. Absolutely wonderful. They Thirst by Robert R. McCammon is another book that I've given 5 stars to. So, one of the things that Steve Donahue has talked about is that when you meet somebody who's a reader, but they don't necessarily have very good taste, is to figure out what it is that they like about something and find them something similar that's better to recommend them. And so, I enjoy Stephen King. I enjoy Stephen King quite a bit. But if I were to try to upgrade somebody from Stephen King to something better, I would try to turn them on to Robert McCammon's horror novels, which came out at about the same time, had similar covers. At the time, I was a little snobbish about Stephen King, and I thought Robert McCammon was like a second-rate knockoff. And I teased my girlfriend at the time about her love of Robert McCammon books until I actually sat down and read one of them, and I was like, holy mackerel, this guy's good. They Thirst is his vampire novel. It's basically his version of Salem's Lot. But instead of a small town in New England, it's set in Los Angeles. Really terrific book. Still batting 1,000 here. That was 1981, 1982. The Prometheus Design, Star Trek novel I read recently. A is for Alibi, the first Kinsey Milhone novel from Sue Grafton. I love the Kinsey Milhone novels from Sue Grafton. I should read all of them at some point. This is 1982. I was 12 years old. The Running Man by Richard Bachman. The Gunslinger by Stephen King. The novelization of Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan by Vonda McIntyre. That's one of my favorite novelizations, by the way. Ogre by Piers Anthony is not really worth talking about. Stalking the Nightmare is a collection of short stories from Harlan Ellison that was published in 82. It was really good. A Barnstormer in Oz by Jose Philip Farmer. That's a treat. Or Philip Jose Farmer. I took my meds this morning, so I have a lot of energy, but I also have little misfires in my brain where I misremember things. Life, the Universe, and Everything by Douglas Adams. So for 1982, what's my favorite out of these? That's a tricky one. Different Seasons, probably, by Stephen King. Came out in 1982. So that's 13 years in a row. I think I'm going to get through this easily, having read a book every year that's been published in every year that I've been alive. 1983, The Robots of Dawn by Isaac Asimov. Triangle, Star Trek novel, talked about it last month. Christine, I think that's one of Stephen King's better books too. On a Pale Horse by Piers Anthony. This is the first in his Incarnations of Immortality series, which I really liked. On a Pale Horse is about a guy who has to take over Death's job. Death is in, the Grim Reaper kind of guy. Cycle of the Werewolf, mediocre Stephen King novel. Pet Sematary, excellent Stephen King novel. Let's see, for those, I can go with Pet Sematary. That's one of the more disturbing books I've read, and it became even more disturbing after I had kids. 1984, how can you give it to anything but Neuromancer by William Gibson? That's a terrific book. Hard to understand. I had to read it a couple times before I got it. But I read a bunch of stuff that was published in 1984, including Thinner by Richard Bachman. Really mediocre. The Talisman by Stephen King, it's okay. Burying an Hourglass by Piers Anthony is the second book in his Incarnations of Immortality series. And I didn't like it as well as the first one, but it's still good. The Tomb by Paul F. Wilson, or F. Paul Wilson. Yeah, I don't even remember that one, but I did read it. And A New Pair of Glasses by Chuck C. It's an AA book. But Neuromancer, yeah, William Gibson. Terrific. And I guess that was the start of the cyberpunk genre. That was 84. 1985, Angry Candy by Harlan Ellison. I think that's one of Harlan Ellison's best collections of short stories. I recommend it a lot, especially the introduction, which I plagiarized part of the introduction for my communications class in college because we had to give a formal speech. And so I gave a eulogy. Anyway, that was the main reason that I passed the class, was because my eulogy was so good, but a lot of it was straight up ripped off from Harlan Ellison. He would not have approved either. The Philosopher's Diet, How to Lose Weight and Change the World by Richard Watson. Really interesting book. Galapagos by Kurt Vonnegut Jr. The Handmaid's Tale by Margaret Atwood. Great book. Ender's Game, Orson Scott Card. Skeleton Crew by Stephen King. The Accidental Tourist by Ann Tyler. The Damnation Game by Clive Barker, etc., etc. Wow, it's really hard to rate anything higher than The Handmaid's Tale because it was so good. But I have such a soft spot for The Accidental Tourist by Ann Tyler. I really love that book. I also love The Damnation Game, for that matter. So that's 16 years. This might be a long video. I'm going to try to speed things up a little bit. Mohawk by Richard Rousseau, terrific book. This is 86. Batman The Dark Knight Returns. I was 16 when that came out. It was like nothing I'd ever seen before, and I was so impressed. We were really into that. Golem and the Gears from Piers Anthony, Wielding a Red Sword by Piers Anthony. Gee whiz, I read a lot of Piers Anthony in those days. A Hidden Place by Robert Charles Wilson. Robert Charles Wilson's a really good science fiction writer if you've never read him. Live Girls by Ray Garton. Another great vampire novel. Oh, that's from 1987. We'll get to that in a minute. So for 1986, I'm going to choose Batman The Dark Knight Returns as my favorite book. 1987 is when Live Girls came out by Ray Garton. If you haven't read anything by Ray Garton, he's a lot of fun. Live Girls is another vampire novel. This one is set partially in a strip club, or largely in a strip club. Replay by Ken Grimwood is one of those time loop novels like Groundhog Day. It's okay. I recently reread it, and it hasn't aged well because of, people just thought about women differently in 1987 than they do now. And this author in particular, I might have been older, I don't know, but Watchmen by Alan Moore, I thought that was terrific. That was also 1987. The Eyes of the Dragon was good. Stephen King, Drawing of the Three. Swan Song by Robert McCammon. That's basically Robert McCammon's The Stand. It's a post-apocalyptic novel, and it's really terrific. Misery by Stephen King is really good. Presumed Innocent by Scott Turow. Wow, that's a great one. The Tommyknockers by Stephen King. Ugh, so bad, man. Oh. The Way We Die Now by Charles Willeford. That's 88, though. So anyway, yeah, Swan Song's an easy one for 1987. That was the best book published that year that I read. 1988, The Way We Die Now by Charles Willeford. The Fool's Progress by Edward Abbey. That's one of my favorite novels of all time. The Silence of the Lambs, though, by Thomas Harris was the same year, and it was really good. I'm going to go with The Fool's Progress there, though, still. I need to reread it. It might not strike such a chord in me now as it did then. 1989, now I'm 19 years old, right? The MD by Thomas M. Dish. Great little horror novel. I found Thomas M. Dish because I'm a big fan of and subscriber to the magazine of science fiction and fantasy, and I'm a lifetime subscriber. But I read a short story in there by Thomas M. Dish that I thought was terrific, so I went out and found novels from him. And that's what I like to use the magazine of science fiction and fantasy for. So if I read a short story that I love, I can go out and find books by that author. The Stephen King Companion, Geek Love by Katherine Dunn. Geek Love by Katherine Dunn is really good too. A Voice Crying in the Wilderness by Edward Abbey. This collection of quotes mostly. Geek Love by Katherine Dunn. Definitely best book out of 1989 for me. Leaving Las Vegas was 1990. Hocus Pocus by Vonnegut. Hayduke Lives by Edward Abbey. Hayduke Lives is a sequel to the one I mentioned earlier, The Monkey Wrench Gang. And it's even worse than The Monkey Wrench Gang. The Burden of Proof by Scott Turow. God, I love Scott Turow novels. Fool's Company is a lot of fun by Robert Lynn Asprin. But for me, picking best book published in 1990, real easy to do. Leaving Las Vegas with The Burden of Proof by Scott Turow being second place. 1991, I'm 21 years old now. I'm old enough to drink. What was published then that I read? Wet Bones by John Shirley. Apparently I liked it. I gave it a lot of stars on Goodreads, but I couldn't tell you anything about the book. I don't remember it. I read it in 2009, so that was still in the middle of my drinking years. The Firm by John Grisham, I read just last month, and I liked it. A Bridge of Years by Robert Charles Wilson. Saint Maybe by Ann Tyler. That might be my favorite Ann Tyler book. It's either that or The Accidental Tourist. Prime Directive by Judith and Garfield Reeves Stevens. That's my favorite Star Trek novel so far. It's really good. Needful Things by Stephen King, good book. Conan the Rogue by John Maddox Roberts, bad book. Anyway, that one's an easy one too. Saint Maybe, with Prime Directive being a close second place. 1992, Intoxicated by My Illness and Other Writings on Life and Death by Anatole Broyard. The Hammer of God by Arthur C. Clarke. Well, I'm probably going to go with The Hammer of God by Arthur C. Clarke. He's one of those grand old men of science fiction. He's a good writer. It's not hard to read either. 1993, Nobody's Fool by Richard Rousseau. I can tell you already, that's going to be my favorite book of the year. Followed closely by The Lone Ranger and Tonto Fist Fight in Heaven by Sherman Alexie. What a great collection of short stories. Sherman Alexie's star sure has faded, though, hasn't it? The Prince of Mist by Carlos Ruiz Zafón. That's another one I can recommend from 1993. 1993 was a big year for me. I got sober the first time in 1993. 1994, In the Lake of the Woods by Tim O'Brien. That's a memorable book. Insomnia by Stephen King. If there's a novel worse than Tommyknockers, it's Insomnia. Damn, that was terrible. Charles Robert Wilson, Mysterium, Bird by Bird. Well, I've skipped on down into 1994. Well, I'm on 1994. Bird by Bird by Anne Lamott. That was true. Thank You for Smoking by Christopher Buckley. Hilarious novel. First in His Class, a biography of Bill Clinton. Loved it. So I'm going to say for 1994, my favorite book that I read published that year was easily Thank You for Smoking by Christopher Buckley. He's real funny. I read a bunch of his books. First in His Class, a biography of Bill Clinton was actually from 95. The Ashes of Eden was also in 1995. Jesus, was that 30 years ago? That's the first book in the Shatnerverse series of novels. Zombie by Joyce Carol Oates. If you want to read a horror book that's actually really, really disturbing, that would be a good one to tackle. I'm going to say Zombie's my favorite by Joyce Carol Oates, although I do love The Ashes of Eden by William Shatner. 96 is when they published The Return by William Shatner. It's hilarious. I talked about it not too long ago on here. Fight Club by Chuck Palahniuk. I liked it. I liked the movie. I like a lot of his other stuff better. Cadillac Jukebox by James Lee Burke. I love all the Dave Robichaux novels, and I love Burke's writing. A Game of Thrones by George R.R. Martin. It's a really good first book in a series. It's too bad it kind of seems to have fallen apart. Frindle by Andrew Clements. This is a children's book I read to my kids. It was a lot of fun. Kingdom Come is a graphic novel from Mark Waid and Alex Ross. Beautiful. Absolutely terrific. Wow. So for that year, that's pretty easy. Kingdom Come, my favorite book for 96. That was another interesting year for me because I started drinking again in November 96. 1997, I'm 27 years old now. Barney's Version by Mordecai Richler. Absolutely loved it. Terrific movie. The Four Agreements by Miguel Ruiz. I don't like self-help books, and this one's not an exception. Cimarron Rose is the first Billy Bob Holland novel. He's from Texas. It's another one from James Lee Burke. I like it. I don't like it as well as I like the Dave Robichaux novels. Avenger by William Shatner. It's the third book in the Shatnerverse series. There were 10 books in the series, and I read all of them. Tuesdays with Morrie by Mitch Albom. I probably shouldn't like that book as much as I do, but I love it. I'm a sucker. I'm sentimental. And The Way You Wear Your Hat, Frank Sinatra and the Lost Art of Living by Bill, and I don't know how to pronounce his last name, Zema, I don't know. Barney's Version, easily my favorite book that was published in 97. So far, I haven't missed a year. I've read a book every year. The Street Lawyers from 1998 by John Grisham. Really mediocre, average legal thriller. Election by Tom Perrotta. That was really good. I like the movie too. Spectre is the fourth book in the Shatnerverse trilogy that came out in 98. Bag of Bones by Stephen King. I like that one a lot. Why Sinatra Matters by Pete Hamill was published in 1998. That's a really good book. Pete Hamill's a great writer. Ex Libris, Confessions of a Common Reader. I love books that are basically memoirs of somebody's experiences, readings. And then A Clash of Kings is the second book in the Song of Ice and Fire series from George R.R. Martin. You know, out of those, I'm going to say Election was my favorite book that was published in 98. I ain't even got to 2000 yet. 1999. Dark Victories is the next book in the Shatnerverse novel. I got that one in. Hannibal by Thomas Harris. Whew. Wow. What happened, man? American Nightmares, The Haunted House Formula in American Popular Fiction by Dale Bailey. That one's really good. That year, my favorite book that was published that year was probably My Movie Business, a memoir by John Irving. And it's basically a memoir just about his experiences making movies out of his books. In the year 2000, I was 30 years old. I was a real man then. Kitchen Confidential by Anthony Bourdain came out that year. And boy, you want to talk about water cooler book, everybody was talking about it. On Writing, a memoir of the craft by Stephen King came out that year too. Plan B by Jonathan Tropper. I love Jonathan Tropper novels. He's wonderful. Strength in What Remains, A Journey of Remembrance and Forgiveness by Tracy Kidder. I guess I like memoirs about grief. Yeah, for that year, my favorite book's probably Kitchen Confidential by Anthony Bourdain. 2001, I'm 31 years old in 2001. About to become a father, but I don't know it yet. Christmas in Plains, Memories is a memoir from Jimmy Carter. I've read quite a few memoirs that I don't remember having read. The Lecturer's Tale by James Hines. If you haven't read James Hines, he's a writer down in Austin. And you want to talk about someone who's really talented at turning academic comedy into horror fiction. He's really good at it. Fast Food Nation, The Dark Side of the All-American Meal by Eric Schlosser. I think it's a little overdone. American Gods by Neil Gaiman came out that year. That's easily my favorite book of the year, but The Lecturer's Tale by James Hines, really easy second place. And in 2002 is the year I became a father. Lullaby by Chuck Palahniuk was published that year. And that's my favorite Chuck Palahniuk novel. It's absolutely terrific. Everything's Eventuals is a book of short stories by Stephen King. It's okay. From a Buick 8, really mediocre. It's Been a Good Life by Isaac Asimov is another memoir. My Work Is Not Yet Done by Thomas Ligotti. Oh, it's so good. Yeah, so, and Complications, A Surgeon's Notes on an Imperfect Science by Atul Gawande. I think that I'm pronouncing that correctly. I'm going to say Lullaby was my favorite novel from 2002. 2003, I had babies. They were twins. I was staying really busy. But, The Rising by Brian King was one of the books published that year that I read. Oh, terrible zombie novel. Just terrible. Sorry, Brian. Shortcut in Time by Charles Dickinson. It was really good. Yeah, it was a really good time travel novel. Moneyball came out that year. Hey Nostradamus by Douglas Copeland came out that year. It was really good. Dry by Augustin Burroughs was good that year. The Book of Joe by Jonathan Tropper. I love Jonathan Tropper. He's so great. So, yeah, there's a whole bunch of books in 2003 that I read. There's no way I could list all of them. Although I do want to mention This Is Where I Leave You, another one by Jonathan Tropper, and Kings of Infinite Space by James Hines. I loved that one. But yeah, there's a whole bunch of them from 2003 that I haven't been mentioned. 2004, City of the Dead is the second book in that series from Brian Keene. I don't know why I read it after that first one was so bad, but it's pulp action fun. Sham, How the Self-Help Movement Made America Helpless by Steve Salerno. That's a pretty good book. That came out in 2005 though. One of my favorite from 2004. This is Kings of Infinite Space by James Hines, definitely. Sorry, this video's gonna be long. You just gonna have to bear with me or find something else to watch. So, 2005, Everything Changes by Jonathan Tropper. All his books are terrific. Ahead of the Curve, 2 years at Harvard Business School. Not particularly helpful. Spin by Robert Charles Wilson. Terrific science fiction novel from 2005. Rebel Bookseller, How to Improvise Your Own Indie Store and Beat Back the Chains. That's a great book, but it didn't keep my bookstore in business, did it? Haunted by Chuck Palahniuk. I don't know, man. I think he just went for a lot of shock value in there more than anything else. I don't think it was particularly scary. It was just gross. I don't know. 2005 is another one where I read a lot of books that were published that year. My favorite from that year, who knows? I don't know. I'm still looking through them. There's so many of them. Old Man's War came out that year too by John Scalzi. That's a good book. John Scalzi's another one who's hit or miss, but Old Man's War was top notch, I thought. Well, let's see. Appaloosa came out. Robert B. Parker Western came out in 2005. Great book, great movie. Real easy. Spin by Charles Robert Wilson. Far and away best book published in 2005 that I read anyway. So 2006, we're getting close now because we're going to 2023. The Last Town on Earth by Thomas Mullen was published in 2006. It's really interesting. It's about the Spanish flu epidemic during World War I. I read it during the pandemic, of course. Rainbow's End by Vernor Vinge. I know he's a really popular science fiction author. I think he's terrible. It's kind of interesting the concepts he looks at, but unfortunately, the people in the novels are just awful. 2006, they're just flat characters. They're not awful people. The Lies of Locke Lamora by Scott Lynch. That's probably going to be my favorite from 2006. I'm just scrolling through here. Although I really loved I'm Proud of You, My Friendship with Fred Rogers by Tim Madigan. Another memoir that I really liked. Hater was a really solid zombie book by David Moody, too. Lies of Locke Lamora by Scott Lynch. My favorite book that was published in 2006. Although I'm still looking through these, too. There were a lot of these in 2006. The Road by Cormac McCarthy. I liked it. 2007, Soon I Will Be Invincible by Austin Grossman. That's a good book, especially if you like superhero stuff. The Uncommon Reader was published that year too. John Dies at the End by David Wong. His real name's Jason Pargin, I think. Anyway, John Dies at the End's terrific. Finn by John Clinch. It's a sequel. Well, not really a sequel. It's about Huck Finn's father. Really good book. Beautiful Boy, A Father's Journey Through His Son's Addiction by David Sheff came out in 2007. Great book. Heart-Shaped Box by Joe Hill. I've read a lot of good books in my life, you know it. Better, A Surgeon's Notes on Performance by Atul Gawande. The 4-Hour Work Week by 2007 by Tim Ferriss. No. God is Dead by Ron Curry Jr. Love Ron Curry Jr., but that's my least favorite of his books. Money for Nothing, One Man's Journey Through the Dark Side of Lottery Millions. That was pretty interesting. 2007, picking a favorite book for then. Ooh, man, it's a really tough one. Finn was so great. But John Dies at the End and The Uncommon Reader and Soon I Will Be Invincible, they were all great. I'm going to call that a 4-way tie just because I can. It's my channel and my video. 2008, Resolution is the second book from Robert B. Parker in that series of Westerns. Due McKee by Stephen King, that's one of his better novels. The Man Who Invented Christmas, How Charles Dickens' A Christmas Carol Rescued His Career and Revived Our Holiday Spirits. It's a little light, but it's good. The Casebook of Victor Frankenstein by Peter Ackroyd. I hate to admit it, but I have no recollection of this. I read it in January of 2014. That was literally 2 or 3 months before I quit drinking. So I read it, but I don't remember it. Wow, a lot of books in 2008. Olive Kitteridge by Elizabeth Strout was a real high point of the books that were published in 2008. The Angel's Game by Carlos Ruiz Zafón is really terrific. City of Thieves was good by David Benioff. The Guernsey Literary and Potato Peel Society by Marianne Schaefer was good. That was published in 2008. The Hunger Games, loved it. My daughters loved it. The Brass Verdict, that's the second Lincoln lawyer novel from Michael Connelly. It's good. Oh, here's a treat. If you haven't read this, you should, especially if you care about food. Eat Me, The Food and Philosophy of Kenny Shopson. It's a cookbook and it's a memoir about his time running Shopson's Groceries in New York City. Really good book. Just After Sunset. Okay, so for 2008, man, I tell you what, The Angel's Game or Olive Kitteridge, one of those two is going to be my favorite that was published that year. 2009, Haunted Heart, The Life and Times of Stephen King, not memorable at all. Emergency, This Book Will Save Your Life by Neil Strauss. That was entertaining enough. Last Night in Twisted River by John Irving. Loved it. Great book. 23 Hours by David Wellington. That was a lot of fun. Pulpy stuff. I'm going through, I'm not going to rattle off the names of all of these. Dark Places by Gillian Flynn was good that year, though. The Last Good Nights, Assisting My Parents with Their Suicides. That's some heavy topic right there. John West. Horns by Joe Hill. That was great. Joe Hill is Stephen King's son. Bestial by Ray Garton. That was a fun one. That's a werewolf novel. Shatner Quake by Jeff Burke. That's a must read if you're a Star Trek fan, or especially if you're a William Shatner fan. It's set at ShatnerCon, a convention devoted to William Shatner. But the Bruce Campbell fans hate the William Shatner fans, and they unleash a reality bomb. And it doesn't work as it's supposed to. The reality bomb is supposed to eliminate William Shatner and all of his characters from existence. But instead, it draws all of the characters that William Shatner has portrayed throughout his career into our universe. And they all have one goal, and that is to be the last surviving Shatner. And then they'll have the power of all the Shatners, I guess. But it's terrific. So you get to see Denny Crane from Boston Legal. You get to see Captain Kirk from the TV series, T.J. Hooker. They're all battling to see who's going to be the last surviving William Shatner, with the real William Shatner there too. Really, really great, funny book too. So, Sandman Slim was published in 2009. Wow, boy. The Magicians came out in 2009 by Lev Grossman. That's terrific. Everything Matters by Ron Curry Jr. Okay, well, we can stop there because that's my favorite novel. So that's definitely going to be my favorite novel from 2009. Really like the Checklist Manifesto by Atul Gawande too. Oh, James Martin wrote a book called The Jesuit Guide to Almost Everything, A Spirituality for Real Life. Now we're on to 2010, by the way. But anyway, that's a really good book. I really like that a lot. Let's see here. Boy, these books that were published in 2010 are a boring bunch until we get to Next by James Hines, which is fantastic. Next is a must read. If you've never read Next by James Hines, highly recommend it. Like James Joyce's Ulysses, it's set during one 24-hour period too. I also like Kings of the Earth by John Clinch. I mentioned him earlier because he wrote Finn. How to Live Safely in a Science Fictional Universe by Charles Yun. I thought that was awful. Noise was pretty entertaining. That was written by Darren Bradley, whom I'm acquainted with. He lives here in my hometown. Really, really cool guy. It's kind of a post-apocalyptic zombie novel set in a fictional version of Denton, Texas. If you're from Denton, Texas, you'll definitely get a lot of pleasure out of that one. So that's 2010. Did I pick a favorite from 2010 yet? Next by James Hines, far and away. Although, The Unnamed by Joshua Ferris was really great too. 2009, 2010, 2011, that's what we're up to now, right? Oh, The Reading Promise, My Father and the Books We Shared by Alice Osma. What a great book, and she's a lovely person. We exchanged some correspondence when I read that book to my daughters. I read it to them the year it came out, and they just loved it. I still read to my daughters here and there, although they're not as interested in sitting and listening to Daddy read now that he's old and crazy. On Conan Doyle by Michael Dirda, that's a great book. Rivers of London by Ben Aronovich. You know, if you're interested in a different kind of urban fantasy from what you find in North America, that's a good one. Among Others by Joe Walton. Didn't like it. The Weird Sisters by Eleanor Brown. Loved it. It's about three daughters of a Shakespeare professor. The Pleasures of Reading in an Age of Distraction by Alan Jacobs. I liked that a lot. 2030, The Real Story of What Happens to America by Albert Brooks. I love Albert Brooks, man. I love all his movies. I love his acting. I didn't much care for his writing, though. You know what I mean? Rules of Civility by Amor Towles came out in 2011. That's a really solid book. I have a hard time not enjoying an Amor Towles book, I think. The Magician King is the second book in the Magician series by Lev Grossman. That's really good, too. Domestic Violence by Matthew Norman. I love Matthew Norman. I just got his new book in the mail yesterday. Life Itself by Roger Ebert. That was a great memoir. Roger Ebert's one of my favorite writers, actually. He's really great. Pauline Kael, A Life in the Dark. That's a biography of the movie critic Pauline Kael. It's okay. 11/22/63 came out in 2011. I got to go see Stephen King read from it and answer questions at the I think it was at the Majestic Theater in Dallas, but I went with some really cool people that night. That was a lot of fun. 11/22/63 would probably be my favorite from that year. I haven't missed a year yet, have I? I don't think I'm going to. 2012. This Is How. Proven Aid in Overcoming Shyness, Molestation, Fatness, Spinsterhood, Grief, Disease, Luxury, Decrepitude, and more for young and old alike by Augustin Burroughs. Loved it. It's great. It's not the kind of self-help that you're used to. It's real stuff in there. Gone Girl by Gillian Flynn. I loved it and the movie both. And there was a great little memoir called Psychic Blues by Mark Edward, published that year. I just read that this year, and it's really interesting. It's a memoir of a phone psychic. Red Shirts by John Scalzi, liked it. The Last Policeman was a terrific book published in 2012 by Ben H. Winters. It's the beginning of a trilogy, and it's about a police officer who's investigating a death that everybody wants to write off as a suicide, because why bother investigating it when there's an asteroid going to crash into Earth in the next year or two and destroy all life on Earth. But this one particular police officer, all he's ever wanted to do is be a detective. That's how he defines himself. And he's, by God, going to investigate the case. One last thing before I go, by Jonathan Tropper, terrific. Man Called Ooh by Frederick Backman, terrific. Studio Donger published a book called The Kugler Dynasty. It's independently published. Oh, it's so good, so good. Flimsy Little Plastic Miracles comes the next year. So for 2012, what's my favorite out of that year? Man, that's a tough one to pick. There were a lot of books I read in 2012. I didn't mention all of them, but I'm probably going to go with The Last Policeman, although I'm tempted to go with Gone Girl. Or one last thing before I go, which was really great too. 2013, Flimsy Little Plastic Miracles by Ron Curry Jr. It's terrific. Countdown City's the second book in the Last Policeman trilogy. The Goldfinch was published in 2013. Easily my favorite of the year. I don't even have to see the rest of the books. I can't imagine anything was almost any better. Ancillary Justice by Ann Leckie was a good science fiction novel that year, though. 2014. I really liked the first 15 Lives of Harry August that year by Claire North. I like that a lot. World of Trouble is the third book in the trilogy of Ben H. Winters that we've been talking about. The Magician's Land by Lev Grossman, third book in the Magician series. That was really good. That was actually 2015. For 2014, golly, I'm going to go with the first 15 Lives of Harry August. I thought it handled the whole time loop thing better than most novels in that genre or subgenre. 2015, we're getting close to 2023 now. Boy, I read some weird books that were published that year. Our Souls at Night by Kent Haruf. It's probably going to be my favorite for the year. Terrific movie on Netflix too, with Robert Redford and Jane Fonda. Browsing's A Year of Reading, Collecting, and Living with Books by Michael Dirda. That's really good. I love all of Michael Dirda's books. He's so cool. Accidental Saints, Finding God in All the Wrong People by Nadja Bolz-Weber. That was a really entertaining book too. That was published in 2015. Gosh. Our Souls at Night, easily my favorite book published in 2015 that I read. 2016, My Best Friend's Exorcism by Grady Hendrix came out. Loved it, just read it this year. We're All Damaged by Matthew Norman. Like any of Matthew Norman's books, it's great. But A Gentleman in Moscow by Amor Towles. Oh, what a good book. Yeah, definitely my favorite book that I read that was published in 2016. 2017, The Futures. All Are Wrong Todays by Ilan Mastai was a pretty entertaining science fiction time travel novel. I liked it. The One-Eyed Man by Ron Curry Jr., that was also a treat. Omar El Akkad, American War. That's considered a work of cli-fi now, climate fiction. It was good too. And then, let's see, Al Frankenstein of the Senate was good. All Systems Red, Martha Wells. That's the first book in the Murderbot Diaries. Definitely worth reading. Some of these I've already talked about on my channel. Arbitrary Stupid Goal by Tamara Shopson. I talked about her dad's book, Eat Me, earlier. For 2017, I'm going to go with The One-Eyed Man as my favorite by Ron Curry Jr. He's such a good writer. I don't know where he disappeared to either, because I think that was the last novel he published. And I can't find anything on his website about any upcoming novels. 2018, Robichaux. Boy, I tell you what, I've read some Dave Robichaux books by James Lee Burke, but that's probably my favorite one. My Year of Rest and Relaxation by Otessa Moshfegh. Wow, I loved that too. That blew my mind. That would make a great double feature with Next by James Hines, in fact. Last Looks by Howard Michael Gould. First book in the Charlie Waldo series. Really fun mystery about a minimalist with a Normal People by Sally Rooney. Oh, God. I won't ever read that one again or anything else by Sally Rooney. It's so depressing. Atomic Habits. James Clear, one of the few self-help books I think is worth reading. Can't Hurt Me, Master Your Mind and Defy the Odds by David Goggins. Ha! Who's going to carry the boats, man? Love David Goggins. He's a weirdo, but I love him. My Year of Rest and Relaxation is easily my favorite that was published in 2018. 2019, Digital Minimalism by Cal Newport was good. Golden State by Ben Winters, who wrote the last Policeman books, was good. Daisy Jones and the Six, though? Wow. That's probably my book of the year. Nope. Anxious People was published in 2019, too. And Anxious People was probably my favorite book of the year in 2019. I liked Recursion by Blake Crouch, though. This Is How You Lose the Time War. Didn't care for that one. 2020, man, we're getting close now. Last Couple Standing by Matthew Norman was really good. But The Glass Hotel by Emily St. John Mandel, really great book. Hamnet by Maggie O'Farrell, that's another one that's crazy overrated. I didn't even like it. Beach Read by Emily Henry I liked, though. Rodham by Curtis Sittenfeld I liked that year, too. That was really great. Disloyal, The True Story of the Former Personal Attorney to President Donald J. Trump by Michael Cohen. He's a lousy writer, and he is exactly what you'd expect him to be if you've seen him on TV. The Midnight Library by Matt Haig, another one that was a real disappointment. The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue I actually liked a lot by V.E. Schwab. So that's 2020. Out of those, my favorite, I don't know, Rodham was really good, I thought. But it's not as good as The Glass Hotel. That was my favorite that year. Okay, so 2021. So I haven't missed a year yet. So I've definitely read a book and been able to find a favorite for every year I've been alive. Dream Girl by Laura Lippman was really good. It was kind of a misery-inspired novel. Billy Summers was really good. That was published in 2021. Last Exit was 2022, actually. Yeah, Billy Summers, probably my favorite from 2021. 2022 was last year. Last Exit by Max Gladstone is going to be hard to beat. It's definitely not going to get beat by the Kaiju Preservation Society by John Scalzi. Scalzi, what happened, man? Not a great book. Book Lovers by Emily Henry. I just finished that and absolutely loved it. My daughter loved it too. I don't know that I loved it more than Last Exit, probably not. Tracy Flick Can't Win was an interesting novel by Tom Perrotta. It's a sequel to Election by Tom Perrotta. It was good. The Lifestyle wasn't very good by Taylor Hahn. It's another one of those rom-com novels that I like, but it's about a couple who decides to try swinging, and there was just so much they could have done with it. I did like Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow by Gabrielle Zevin. It got a lot of praise, and everybody else seemed to like it too. Fairy Tale by Stephen King was not very good either. Cinema Speculation by Quentin Tarantino I liked a lot. But if I had to choose a favorite from that year, probably can go with Last Exit. That was recommended to me by Steve Donahue. Some of you might have seen his YouTube channel. And then in 2023, The Donut Legion by Joe Lansdale. That's my pick. So, okay, there you go. There's several books from every year I've been alive, along with my favorites and second place favorites and runners-ups and all the rest. And golly, I've been talking for almost an hour. If you managed to hang in there and listen to me ramble on for an hour about books that I've read, well, God bless you. I'll be back soon with more videos. Until then, stay hydrated, folks, and stay sexy.